This is the 24th of February, 2021, and today we are talking with Mike Peterson in Shenandoah, Iowa, and he is joining us from KMA Studios in luxurious Shenandoah. Right, Mike?
That's right. The thriving metropolis here in Page County, Iowa.
Southwest part of the state. And Mike, you are a Nebraska native. What was your upbringing getting into high school?
Well, I'm originally from Fremont, Nebraska. I was born there in 1963. My parents were Rudolph and Dorothy Peterson. I grew up and went through the school district there, Fremont Public Schools, and I graduated from Fremont High School in 1981. I was very fortunate when I was at Fremont High to go through their journalism program there. They had a very strong program in my junior and senior years. In my senior year in high school, I was a news writer for The Rustler, which was the paper, the school paper there. And I was under Doyle Schwaniger, who was my advisor and our instructor there. And I learned a great deal. And that's really where I kind of got my feet wet. I wasn't a very good student up until that time, but I think with The Rustler, I finally found my niche. I always loved broadcasting, and I always thought about getting into radio or television, but I think that was my first taste of journalism experience. I learned a lot from that experience, and that really kind of set the tone for whatever happened, throughout the rest of my career, so to speak.
You have one of those backgrounds that to me is always interesting in the sense of Nebraska guy goes to California. Why did you end up in the Golden State for your college and university experience?
Well, there's several reasons. I went out to California, I think when I was 9 years old. I have a sister who lives out there with my sister Linda, with my brother-in-law John, and they live in Monterey Park, California. And I think the first time I went out there was like 72, 75 or somewhere in that area. And I was just enamored with Los Angeles and Southern California. One of the things that just drew to me was it was such a huge media city. It's the number 2 radio and television market in the country. And it was big back then, and it is now. And I was just enthralled by what I saw on the television, some of the TV stations, and the radio stations were just magnificent. So I ended up going to school out there at Cal State Los Angeles. I went for school for 5 years out there from 1981 to 86. I got to do a lot of stuff there. I was editor-in-chief of the University Times at Cal State LA. I worked in media relations for the Olympic judo events in 1984, probably two of the greatest weeks of my life, being a part of the Olympic experience in 84. I was able to get on Falcon Cable Television in Alhambra, California, my first real broadcasting experience, doing play-by-play in color of high school football games. And then in my senior year, I did the University Times television newscasts every morning on the local campus TV station. And then I had an internship at KCBS Channel 2 in Los Angeles in the sports department. I would go on Saturdays and Sundays and monitor all the games and make notes for the sports department. Met a lot of great people there. For example, Ann Curry, who went on to the Today Show, was a news anchor there. And Paula Zahn, she was anchoring there. I met her, and lots of other LA type TV legends like Jess Marlowe and John Schubeck and Colleen Williams, people, Bill Stout, Ralph Story, people that if you're in Los Angeles, you might recognize, or some that do have a national following. But it was just a great experience. And I learned a great deal about journalism, really with the University Times, and my time with Falcon Cable and the Channel 2 experience. It really kind of assured me that this is kind of the field that I want to get into. And, you know, in Los Angeles, listening to all the radio stations and hearing some of the great people, for example, sports legends. I was thinking back to when I used to listen to Vin Scully do the Los Angeles Dodger games out there. He was just, it's nothing that you would ever hear from the Midwest and stuff. He just had a great voice. Chick Hearn, the play-by-play announcer for the Los Angeles Lakers. I got to hear all these professionals out there, not saying that anybody in the Midwest isn't professional, but it just really kind of gave me an idea of what to shoot for if you wanted to be a professional type broadcaster.
Well, from the Rustler to KCBS and the Olympics, was there anything that was the same about the two?
Well, as far as the journalism writing is something that I got out of the most. I was glad that I had this experience with the Rustler when I started to be the editor of the University Times in terms of news writing and style and learning things such as punctuation and proofreading, which is still I have to do a better job at in my current job. But, I learned those and when we started to put news on our website here at KMA, KMAland.com, I'd always fall back to some of the news writing principles that I learned in high school and then with the UT at Cal State LA.
The Olympic experience, Mike. Well, first, let me get my final joke in here of this section. Every time you say Falcon Cable, I think it's Falcon Crest, and you're going to start talking about Lorenzo Lamas. But no, the Olympic experience, what was that? How was that with seeing international media? I mean, Los Angeles is a pretty international city, but then to be part of an international event like the Olympics, walk me through a typical day as an Olympic worker.
Well, when the Olympic judo events happen at Cal State LA, I think I would get there at around noon or 1 o'clock or so. The competition would start in the mid-afternoon, and I would have to write up a synopsis and press releases about the results. And I would have to sit and monitor each of the matches. I didn't know a lick about judo. I had to study up on things like an ippon and an ouchigari, which is a major inner reaping, an ippon, which is kind of like a takedown in wrestling. And I had to learn all that stuff and try to decipher it and make it sound like it was intelligence, like I could write it up. And
can you still spell them?
No. There's a lot of things, I've got a big suitcase full of Olympic stuff that's still downstairs in my basement. And every once in a while I get it out and look it up. But I got to meet a lot of people from different walks of life. We had a bunch of interpreters that were all from different nationalities. They were all from the Los Angeles area, and they were really nice. And I worked with a lot of my Cal State LA students as volunteers during that time. And, it was a great experience for me. Great 2 weeks. I sure miss it. And, it's kind of nice to put on your resume that you were an Olympic volunteer. That didn't hurt a bit.
Well, your resume, you're to that point in your life where it is time to put that out there. How did you land that first job, and how did you decide? Because you could have stayed in the California area and, worked your way through the system, but what drew you back to the Midwest?
Well, I realized as I was getting through my senior year that if I was going to stay out there, it probably wouldn't be an on-air position. I mean, we're talking about the number 2 market in the country. I got what I could from being in Los Angeles with the cable TV experience and the journalism experience and the write and the internship. But I knew that if I wanted to be on the air in radio or television, I'd have to go to a smaller place. So I left California after I graduated from Cal State in 1986. And it took me about a year to finally get a job in the business. In fact, I was out in California again in the summer of 87 when I got a phone call from KILR Radio in Estherville saying that they had an opening for a nighttime announcer. And they're wondering if I'd be interested in coming and get an interview. So I flew out of California, went up to Estherville, Iowa, which is way up in northern Iowa, of course, went through the interview, and I became a night announcer there. I worked there from 1987 until 1989. I was news director at the station the last 4 months I worked there. And I was about as green as you can get as far as an announcer is concerned. That was like radio boot camp for me. And I learned a great deal, made a lot of mistakes, and course, you still make mistakes, but I learned a lot from my mistakes, and I worked under some good people like Mike Dudding, who was the sports director there, and Doug Burton, who was kind of a legendary announcer at KILR for many years. Learned from those folks and got a lot of experience. I ran the board for the Minnesota Twins games at night, and that was a lot of fun. And then I did put together a newscast at 10:05 right after ABC News at the top of the hour. And that gave me my first taste of doing radio newscasts.
What was that first newscast? What was it on? Was it a reel-to-reel machine? Was it live? Was it taped?
It was live, but of course, back then when I started, we were still using cassette tapes to record a lot of things. We were still using carts. We had actualities on carts, which of course look like 8-track tapes. Now, you try to tell today's generation as to what cart machines look like, and 8-tracks, they have no concept. But it was all very crude, and I think I still edited some reel-to-reel tape occasionally too. So I did a little bit of everything there. Did sports, did some sports casts, and that was a lot of fun. And so you got to do a little bit of everything there at night at KILR.
Then KSIB comes calling.
Yes.
And that one was not, were you looking to move, and how did that job evolve?
Well, it was coming up on 2 years there at KILR. And frankly, I mean, Estherville is a nice town. It's near the Iowa Great Lakes area. But it was tough for me because I was all alone up there. I didn't have any friends. I was far away from any family. And, I still miss my friends out in California. And I wanted to get somewhere that was closer to Fremont, where my folks were still living and the rest of my family. And I sent in a tape and a resume to KSIB. And in August of '89, I got a call from Dave Reek, who is the general manager. And he asked me if I'd be interested in coming down and interviewing there. And so I went there Labor Day weekend of 1989. I was interviewed, and I don't know, I walked into that station there. It's right off of Highway 34. And immediately I got good vibes from it. I can't explain it, but it just felt right, and it felt good to me. And the interview went great. He offered me the job right after the interview, and I said, yeah. So I moved down there. I spent another week and a half at KILR, moved down there. My first weekend at KSIB was the weekend where they had their Balloon Days Festival. They had the Southwest Iowa Balloon Jamboree there, which is kind of like the Super Bowl for Creston. And I spent that first weekend covering Balloon Days, not knowing anything about balloon races or something. And they kind of threw me into the fire that first weekend. And it was a lot of fun. We'd cover the balloon races. We'd cover the takeoffs, kind of like the Apollo moonshots. And we chased the balloons and live on the air. It was loads of fun. And just from there on, I just kind of hit the ground running at that station. I spent 10 years as news director there. And then I also did a lot of sports there too.
How big was that staff?
It was a small staff. I was the lone ranger as far as the news director there. We had Gary Buckland, who is our sports director, and we had great announcers like Jeff Angelo, who is now at WHO Radio in Des Moines. We had Ben Walter, who is still there at KSIB, who is kind of like a living legend in himself there. Gary Buckland is also a legend too, I might add. Kind of one of the great gurus of Southwest Iowa sports. I got one story I want to tell you about covering sports at KSIB. It was a 1992 football playoff game, high school football playoff game, district game between Creston, Orient, Maxburg, and Norwalk. It was at the Norwalk football field there at the high school. And it was going to be cold. We knew it was going to be cold going into that game. I had a pair of Dave Reek's coveralls that I buried, and I dressed up for it. But when we got there, we found out that they put our broadcasting position on top of a building overlooking the field. Gary and I broadcast the game in a 20-mile-per-hour wind hitting us. It was the coldest I've ever been in my life. About midway through the game, I think my jaw started to freeze. I was having trouble formulating words. I had trouble anyway, but this was the coldest I've ever been in my life. I think at one time of the game, I said something to Buck. I said, Gary turns to me and says, "Oh, that's a very interesting observation, Mike, but would you mind saying that again?" So, and it was one of those games. I remember Casey Downing scored a touchdown for Creston in the first period on like a 65-yard run. And doing in the analysis, the only thing I could think of was to break into the voice of John Facenda from NFL Films. And so Casey Downing trudged across the frozen tundra of Norwalk Field. Gary Buckland, I think he laughed for about 30 seconds.
Well, we're still laughing about it today.
That's
still a great story. The sports, how much of the sports did that help your news, or did your news help your sports? How do you view that?
Well, it was a good relationship. News was always my passion, but I like doing sports occasionally. It did take my mind off of the news coverage. It was kind of tough balancing, like, for example, when you had to cover basketball tournament games at night and maybe you'd miss a meeting or something like that. So you had to play catch up the next day to get news stories done. It was a challenge all the way around. Some of those meetings I covered at KSIB were long. For example, their school board meetings are like 2.5 hours long. And I have to go in the next day and try to write a story early in the morning and get that on the air at the 7:05 news. And then I would have a talk show, the Grapevine show on Tuesdays mornings. So, and then usually on Tuesday nights, there were city council meetings. So there were some long days that I worked at KSIB. I don't think I ever got enough sleep when I worked there.
Well, kind of sleep is always a challenge.
What's sleep? Exactly. Who knows anything about sleep in this business, right?
So tell me about the Grapevine show. Public affairs has long been a part of many radio stations. Was the theme of that public affairs, and how different was that than a morning show?
Well, the morning show would usually be consisting of news, and I would usually get to talk to who the morning man was. For a while, it was D.W. Pissell who did the morning, and then Ben Walter took over the morning hours after Jeff Angelo left. But the Grapevine show was a public affairs show where we interviewed school personnel, politicians, a lot of our legislative leaders, and some other folks who had big events coming up in the community. Is kind of a good way to tap into what was happening in the community. We had one guest on there, Kurt Olson, who was the late Creston High School activities director. You mentioned Kurt's name for anybody in Creston, and they know who it is. He was a great guest. You could ask like 2 or 3 questions, and Kurt would go for like 15 minutes. If you wanted to fill up airtime, he'd be wonderful. He was just a great guest and a great guy.
Was he one of those guys you wish would have, did you find one of those in Shenandoah when that station came calling? And let's talk about the transition from one station to another.
Well, that was kind of a tough deal. It was 21 years ago that I came to KMA here, February of 2000. And that was, it was going to the point at KSIB where I don't know whether it was burnout or something, but I realized I was putting in some long hours. By that time, I had been married to my wife, Mary, for about 6 years. And we had a daughter, Abby, whom we had adopted from India. And it was that point where I kind of wanted to spend more time. And it was tough trying to do that when you were trying to go full bore on covering news. And maybe I was ready for a change. So 2 days after Christmas in 1999, Bill Bone, who was the news director at KMA back then, gave me a call and was wondering whether or not he knew of anybody who was looking for a job in the business who might want to come to KMA as an assistant in the news department. So I don't know. I think there was a voice in the back of my head that said, Mike, you better look into this. And so I said, well, I'd be interested in interviewing for the job. And so I came over to Shenandoah to KMA, and Bill sat down with me and Don Hansen, who is the program director, who is still at KMA, although semi-retired, kind of a legendary figure at KMA himself. interviewed me, and I was hired. And, you know, it was tough leaving Creston. I love that community, and I still do, but made the move to KMA in February of 2000. February 14th is when I started, and it's been 21 years. And it's a move that really paid off for me in so many ways. You know, KMA is such a legendary station. It's been on the air for 95 years. It was started by the May family. Earl May founded the station as a method to sell seed. And you think about the legendary figures that worked here at KMA, not only the May family, but news people like Ralph Childs and Ned Dermody and Dean Navin. Of course, we had Frank Field, who was a legendary weather forecaster. And then the homemakers have always been kind of a legendary part of KMA. People like Billy Oakley and Edith Hansen and Leona Driftmeyer, and then Evelyn Birkby, who unfortunately we just lost this month in February at the age of 101. Such a neat lady. And coming to here, to me, it was like going to the New York Yankees. KMA is just one of the leading stations in this state. It still is. And I still feel that way. You put on a shirt with a KMA insignia on it. To me, it's like wearing Yankee pinstripes. I hope that doesn't offend non-Yankee fans, but we're a dynasty. This station is a dynasty.
And why is it? How did that happen? Was it a dynasty right away, or is it a lot of those names that you mentioned that helped build it? Is it that it's in a part of the state that might not get as much coverage by a big network or a big city station? What made KMA special?
Well, I think it's because it was service oriented, as Andy Anderson, former program director and general manager, once said. We're geared up in the community. We cover a large area. We still cover Southwest Iowa and Northwest Missouri and Southeast Nebraska. And regional and local content was always very important, and especially for situations like our sports coverage. And then weather. People depend on us when there's severe storms that come up, tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings. We're usually the station that they turn into. Don Hansen, who's been here for a long time, does a wonderful job as far as weather coverage is concerned. And so we just build up that tradition all these years. And I hope and I believe that our current staff is keeping that tradition going. Now, a few years ago, Ed May Jr. sold the station, and he made sure that he sold it to a group of people here in Shenandoah, local owners, a group of local folks who wanted to keep the station alive and who did not want to see that station bought out by some major conglomerate. So I think it's just the local flavor that's always really sustained KMA over the years, and why people still turn to the station to this day.
When you were hired, was that aware? Were you aware that that's the way it was going to be, or was that something you already knew that's what you had to do?
Oh yeah, I was aware. I knew the station, and I knew its history. I knew it was the station of the people I mentioned before, and I knew some of the other people that worked here at KMA, not only Bill and Don, but for example, Lee Hughes, who was the sports director back then when I was hired. He had a great voice, great with sports. And then Dean Atkins, who was a host here for many years, an on-air personality, and he was our farm director until a few years ago when he decided to retire. But he was a great personality. He was a person that I compared to, say, somebody who worked in the Los Angeles market, who just had that great voice, great persona. And I knew that I was getting into kind of the A troops when I worked here, and I knew about the tradition. And again, that was one of the things that kind of lured me to here.
Well, we all know how good the Yankees are and how everybody wants to be a part of them.
Well, I'm a Dodger fan, actually.
Right, that's hard for
that point. Yeah,
hard for Dodger Blue. I did have a Dodger bobblehead up here for you, Mike, but I moved it off to the side. We could talk baseball. There's baseballs right up here in my truck ready to go for you.
I should have brought my Steve Garvey bobblehead for this.
Oh, there you go. That would work. Or, let's go Steve Yeager on that same team. But
there you
mentioned
go.
Vin Scully already. The coverage of Southwest Iowa news, people do think KMA. They think of your station. There's a lot of roads and a lot of candidates, political candidates, that come through your area because they know getting on your station is a big deal. How has covering politics, presidential, senatorial, congressional, how's that viewed, and what's the strategy that you have there?
Well, I think we don't have any particular strategy. We try to be fair. We don't interview surrogates unless, for example, if Bill Clinton is campaigning for his wife, Hillary. I think that's an exception to the rule. Or, for example, a few years ago, Eric Trump came in 2016 to campaign for his dad. So those are exceptions, but we try to be fair. We're impartial. We don't favor one party over the other, but we try to give them exposure and experience, but try not to knock everybody out. We will try to get as many people as possible, whether it's, for example, a city council race or a race for a school board or the legislative races. We try to get as many candidates on as we can to let people know who these people are. Thinking back in my career, I've had a chance to interview a lot of the national candidates that I would otherwise may not be able to get to know. I'll never forget in September of 2007, it was Shenfest weekend here in Shenandoah. It was a beautiful fall Saturday afternoon, and Barack Obama came to speak at Gotch Park, which is this little park in this little neighborhood of Shenandoah. He drew 400 people to this little park, and it was just a magnificent setting. And I got to sit down and talk to him for about 10 minutes after his speech. Little did I know that he would end up overtaking Hillary Clinton in the ratings and in the polls, winning the Iowa caucuses in 2008, and he ended up being elected president later that fall in 2008. So it's just one of those chance encounters. And I've had chances to talk to Hillary Clinton and so many others. Joe Biden, I interviewed him twice, once in Clear Lake during the Iowa Broadcast News Association convention in 2007. And then later that year, when he came to Red Oak, I've interviewed Patrick Buchanan. A story about Patrick Buchanan, if I may. It was at KSIB in Creston. Pat Buchanan was campaigning for president, and he stopped by the station at Creston one time. And I was going to interview him, and he asked if we had a pop machine. Well, I said, well, okay, we have a pop machine downstairs. I can get one for you. Now, before I could tell him to wait upstairs, he follows me downstairs into our basement, which was the absolute dregs. And I'm getting a Diet Pepsi or a Diet Coke for him. And he's in this we're sitting there looking at old records. I mean, this was Pat Buchanan, Mr. Crossfire, the ex-Nixon aide, and he's just there looking at the old records. Oh, this looks good, man. This is a great record. I wonder if we could play this. So that's just one of the funny stories that I have of some of the people that you would never get a chance to interview or talk to otherwise, but because you're in the media, you get to meet these people.
It sounds like a career that maybe if you've done it long enough and maybe won a couple of awards, that maybe an organization might put a nomination together and bestow upon you, Mike, the Jack Shelley Award from the Iowa Broadcast News Association. You did not know. The winner of that never knows it's coming. But you kind of had a sense maybe something was in the air that year, and especially that night.
Well, in truthfulness, somebody did tell me that I was nominated with somebody here at the station, but I thought, nah, I'm not going to win. There are so many great people that have received that award over the years, as you know, Paul. And you look at the list of people. I used to look at all of the people who won that award, and they're like the legends of Iowa broadcasting. They made the business what it is, and they were people that I knew, and a lot of them that I just looked up to throughout my careers. I just thought the world of these people. And I thought, there's no way that I was going to win. No way. Well, what should have tipped me off is that my wife, who had missed the last 3 or 4 conventions, wanted to go to the IBNA awards banquet with me. And that should have been a tip off right there. Well, we're going through the awards, and then John Lytle from Drake University was the recipient in 2010. he got up and started to give clues as to who the 2011 recipient was. And he started to mention that this recipient once was the editor of a college newspaper. And I thought, well, I was an editor of a college newspaper, but that's no big deal. Then he said, this recipient also sings in a church choir. And I thought, well, I sing in the Shenandoah United Methodist Church Choir. And oh no. And then it hit me. My wife tells me to turn around. And I look over my shoulder. Here's my dad standing there all the way from Fremont. I had my brothers Jim and Paul were there, and their wives, my mother and father-in-law, and my two daughters, Abby and Anna. They were all there. And you ever have one of those out-of-body experiences? When John Lytle called me up to the stand and asked me to accept the award, I floated up there. I don't remember feeling anything. I don't remember. It was just an out-of-body experience. And I got up there, and I think I probably gave the longest rambling speech in IBNA Jack Shelley Awards history. I thanked everybody and his brother for the career, because I didn't want to miss everything. And I'm not a person who's been known to be brief on everything, as you can probably tell from some of my answers. But it was one of those great moments. Everybody in their lives should have a night like that where they're honored and celebrated and recognized. The melancholy thing about that, as I look back on that almost 10 years now, my mother and father-in-law were at there that night, and they're gone. I had a sister-in-law who was there that night, and she's gone. So there's a lot of things that I look back on that night. I'm glad it happened. I miss the people that, of course, my father is gone too, and he was there that night. But it's just, like I said, it's one of those nights that everybody should have in their lives and in their career. And I was very fortunate to be recognized. And I owe a lot to the IBNA. It's been a great organization over the years with some super people, some outstanding professionals who I just think the world of.
We could ask our producer on these interviews, Cliff Brockman, if he remembers what his speech was like. He did, by the way, want me to let you know that he's a Brewers fan. So we're going to have to argue about the National League a little bit as a Cardinal fan, Dodger fan, and Brewer fan walk into an archive interview. Mike, as we wrap up here, when you think about the state of journalism from when you were a high school kid in Fremont to a college student in California to a multi-stop radio news person, news director, has the state of journalism changed over your career? And if it has, for the better, a little more challenging?
Well, in some ways it hasn't. You still want to get things right. You still want to be accurate. You still want to be fair. The three basics of news writing: accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Those ideals and those standards are still there. You still want to get everything right and do a good job. Not be perfect, but do a good job on it. The things that have changed, I think, for journalism over the years is, number one, the technology. I mentioned earlier that when I started back in Esterville and in Creston, we had cart machines, we had cassettes, reel to reel, and now we have computers. We have digital recorders. These digital recorders that are by the size of a machine, this small machines.
I was going to say the size of a cassette from the cart machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have right now?
I was going to say a size of the cigarette lighter. This is what we use now. And I think probably people use smaller. They use their cell phones to record interviews now. That's another thing. Cell phones can kind of give you instant communication on that. You have computers. You do digital editing now on computer machines where you interview sound, you put sound bites together via computers. You read your stories off of screens. For example, wire reading is common in this business. So that's one big change. Another big challenge right now that we're facing in journalism is the social media, having to contend with Facebook and Twitter, the information that goes out from people that sometimes don't hold up to journalism ideals. And that's a major challenge, and especially true over the last year with trying to cover COVID-19. and trying to get accurate information out about the virus and trying to combat information that was put on Facebook, especially, that was inaccurate about the virus being a hoax and these cures for COVID, and the criticism you receive. We've received a lot of criticism, for reporting the numbers and not telling people, well, this is a hoax, you shouldn't be reporting this, or you need to stop reporting coronavirus. And that's another thing that's been a challenge for journalism. I think that the criticism has gone up dramatically over the last few years. And I say that, and judging from some of my colleagues have told me, they're facing a lot more heat than they used to. I think it started well before the previous presidential administration, and it's all filtered down to the local area. We're all facing a lot more criticism, but I think if we continue to hold to our ideals and realize that 98% of the people in this business want to get it right and want to do a great job for their station and therefore for their community, if we just hold to our ideals and hold on to why we love the job and why we love this business, that's how we get through this.
Well, it's how we've gotten through this interview, and we're so glad. Mike, I guess I have to ask, is there any other thing that you wanted to talk about today, or things as you look back at a career of several decades that you would like to talk about that maybe I didn't ask?
Well, I look back on some of the stories that I've covered over the years, primarily the last 20 years at KMA. For example, I mentioned severe weather coverage. KMA has always been big. I know when I was here at KMA alone, we've covered things like the Little Sioux Scout Camp tornado that hit in June of 2008 and killed 4 of the scouts that were there. I was on the air that night doing storm reports when that happened. Of course, the 2011 and 2019 Missouri River floods, 2 100-year floods that hit within 8 years of each other. And that was devastating, and also really took a lot of sap out of me in trying to recover those things. The fires like the 2008 Valley News Today fire, which really changed the shape of downtown Shenandoah. I was lucky enough to cover the Western Iowa World War II honor flight in 2007. I went to Washington for the Korean War honor flight in 2013. We were talking about some of the figures that I interviewed as far as politics. I've had a chance to interview a lot of famous people. The late Hugh Sidey was, of course, with Time and Life magazine. I talked to him for about a half hour about his experience with the JFK assassination, riding in the motorcade when that terrible thing happened. What's really neat is I got to interview folks like, I love astronauts. I always loved the space program. And I interviewed Peggy Whitson and astronauts like Clayton Anderson, Walter Cunningham, who was from Creston. One interview I'll never forget was when I got a chance to interview Don Everly of the Everly Brothers, who, of course, the Everlys are, of course, famous here in Shenandoah. They performed as live performers on KMA in the 30s and the 40s growing up. And Don Everly called me one day to make a campaign interview for Hillary Clinton. And that was back in 2016. I interviewed him a little bit of that, but mostly about his career. And that is one interview I'll never forget. So these are people that you don't get a chance to meet. And that's been kind of the highlights in my career. But I guess the highlight has been serving Southwest Iowa and Shenandoah, living in a neat community and having a wonderful wife and 2 wonderful daughters that rode along with me along the way.
Mike Peterson, KMA Radio, Shenandoah, Iowa, on this, the 24th day of February 2021. Thank you so very much for your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I thank the Archive of Iowa Broadcasting for bestowing this honor upon me. And I look forward to hearing from a lot of great people in their interviews in the future.